The morning sun had just begun to light up the grand entrance of the Royal Palm Hotel as Thomas adjusted his uniform and prepared for another day of opening doors. At 34 years old, he had been working as a doorman at this five-star establishment for almost a decade. His dark blue uniform was spotless, his cap perfectly straight, and his white gloves crisp and clean. Thomas took pride in his appearance even if most guests barely noticed him. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds." Thomas greeted the hotel manager with a warm smile. "Morning, Thomas. Ready for another busy day?" Mr. Reynolds asked, straightening his tie as he walked past. "Always ready, sir," Thomas replied with genuine enthusiasm that surprised even himself sometimes. The truth was, Thomas hadn't always planned on being a doorman. Life had taken an unexpected turn for him years ago. Before putting on this uniform, he had been a promising piano student at the prestigious National Conservatory of Music. His teachers had once called him a rare talent, someone who could make the piano sing in ways few could. But dreams cost money, and when his father fell ill 7 years ago, Thomas had to make a choice. He still remembered the day he walked away from the conservatory, his scholarship only covering half the tuition, and his family needing every penny he could earn. The Royal Palm had hired him right away, impressed by his polite manners and professional demeanor. What had started as a temporary solution became his daily life. As the morning rush began, Thomas greeted each guest with the same respectful nod and friendly smile. Some nodded back, some mumbled a thank you, and many walked right past as if he were just another fixture of the building. He didn't mind much. He understood that people had their own worries and busy schedules. "Hold the door, please," a harried businessman called out, rushing toward the entrance with his phone pressed to his ear. Thomas stood patiently, door wide open, as the man finished his conversation before entering. "Thank you." "Sorry about that," the man said surprisingly. "No problem at all, sir. Have a wonderful day," Thomas replied, genuinely pleased by the small acknowledgement. By midday, the hotel was buzzing with activity. A charity event was being set up in the grand ballroom, and important guests had been arriving all morning. Thomas had heard whispers among the staff that Vanessa Hartman would be attending. Even he knew who she was, the 30-year-old tech genius who had made her first million by 25 and was now worth over $200 million. "She's supposed to be quite difficult," one of the bellhops whispered to Thomas during a quiet moment. "My cousin works at the Westridge Hotel, and he said she made 3 housekeepers cry during her stay there last year." Thomas just shrugged. "Everyone deserves the same respect until proven otherwise," he said, a philosophy that had served him well over the years. At precisely 3 o'clock, a sleek black limousine pulled up to the entrance. Thomas straightened his posture and put on his best smile. The driver opened the door and out stepped a woman in a tailored blue suit, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, large sunglasses hiding her eyes despite the cloudy day. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome to the Royal Palm Hotel," Thomas greeted her, opening the door with a slight bow. Vanessa Hartman didn't acknowledge him at all. She was speaking rapidly into her phone, her voice sharp and commanding. "I don't care what it takes, Gregory. I need this problem fixed before the gala tomorrow. The entire board will be there and everything must be perfect." She walked past Thomas as if he were invisible, following. Behind her was a nervous-looking young woman clutching a tablet and several folders, clearly her assistant. "Sorry," the assistant whispered to Thomas as she hurried past, giving him an apologetic smile. Thomas just nodded understandingly. He had seen this dynamic countless times before. Throughout the afternoon, Vanessa could be heard throughout the lobby, her voice rising occasionally as she directed staff about the charity gala preparations. Thomas caught glimpses of the activity as he went about his duties, noticing how the hotel staff scrambled to meet her every demand. During his break, Thomas slipped away to the employee lounge and pulled out his worn sandwich. He ate quietly while some of his coworkers complained about the millionaire monster, as they had nicknamed Vanessa. "Did you see how she yelled at poor Jenny from catering?" one of the housekeepers said. "All because the sample appetizers weren't arranged in perfect rows." Thomas listened but didn't join in. He had learned long ago that everyone had their own battles. Maybe Vanessa had good reasons for being so demanding, or maybe not. Either way, it wasn't his place to judge. As his break ended, Thomas returned to his post, nodding politely to guests as they came and went. The hotel was hosting several events that day, and people in fancy clothes streamed in and out of the revolving doors. Around 6 in the evening, as the sky outside darkened with storm clouds, Thomas heard a commotion from the direction of the grand ballroom. Vanessa's voice carried across the marble-floored lobby. "What do you mean he canceled? The gala is tomorrow night," she was shouting at her trembling assistant. "How am I supposed to host a charity event for the Arts Foundation without a pianist? It's the entire theme of the night." "I'm so sorry, Ms. Hartman," the assistant stammered. "He called just now, food poisoning. He's in the hospital. I've already called 3 agencies, but everyone is booked for tomorrow night." Vanessa removed her sunglasses, revealing sharp brown eyes filled with frustration. "This is unacceptable. The whole point of this gala is to impress the board members and potential donors. Do you have any idea how much money we could lose if this event isn't perfect?" Thomas continued his work, trying not to eavesdrop but finding it impossible not to hear the conversation happening just 20 feet away from his post. "Perhaps we could use recorded music?" the assistant suggested timidly. "Recorded music? At a charity event for classical arts education?" Vanessa's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Yes, that will really convince donors to fund music programs, showing them we couldn't even find a live pianist." The hotel manager approached cautiously. "Ms. Hartman, if I may, perhaps we could help you find a replacement. We do have connections with several local musicians. Unless you can find me a concert-level pianist by tomorrow at 6, I don't see how that helps me," Vanessa snapped. Thomas felt a strange tightening in his chest. It had been years since he had performed for anyone besides himself, on the old upright piano he kept in his small apartment. His fingers suddenly itched to touch piano keys again, a feeling he usually suppressed during working hours. As the rain began to fall outside, guests hurried in, and Thomas was kept busy opening doors and offering umbrellas. The crisis with the pianist continued throughout the evening, with Vanessa making countless phone calls in the lobby, her voice growing increasingly desperate. By the end of his shift at 10 o'clock, Thomas was exhausted. Most of the hotel had quieted down, though lights still burned in the ballroom where preparations continued for tomorrow's event. As he prepared to leave, Thomas took a detour past the ballroom, curious about the setup. The large space had been transformed beautifully. Round tables with crisp white cloths surrounded a small stage where a magnificent grand piano stood alone under soft lighting. Thomas paused in the doorway, mesmerized by the instrument. It was a Steinway, probably worth more than he would earn in 5 years. Without thinking, he stepped into the room, drawn to the piano like a magnet. He glanced around. The room was empty, the staff having taken a break from preparations. Before he could stop himself, Thomas slipped onto the bench and lifted the cover from the keys. The ivory felt cool and familiar under his fingertips. He pressed one key silently, then another, muscle memory from years of practice returning instantly. Taking a deep breath, Thomas began to play softly, a gentle Chopin nocturne that had once been his favorite piece to perform. As the beautiful notes filled the empty ballroom, Thomas closed his eyes, transported back to a time when music had been his entire world. His fingers moved with surprising confidence, finding each note perfectly, despite the years away from serious practice. The piece grew in intensity, his body swaying slightly with the emotion of the music. So lost was he in the performance that Thomas didn't notice the figure standing in the doorway, watching him with widening eyes and parted lips. He didn't see Vanessa Hartman's expression transform from irritation to astonishment as his hands danced across the keys with the skill of a professional concert pianist. Only, when the final notes faded away, did Thomas become aware he was no longer alone. He jumped up from the bench, his face flushing with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," he began, straightening his uniform. "I shouldn't have—" "You're the doorman," Vanessa stated flatly, stepping into the room, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Yes, ma'am." "Thomas Reyes. I apologize for touching the piano without permission." Vanessa approached slowly, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Thomas hesitated. "I studied at the National Conservatory a long time ago." "And now you're opening doors at a hotel?" She sounded genuinely confused, perhaps for the first time since her arrival, showing an emotion other than irritation. "Life takes unexpected turns sometimes," Thomas answered simply. Vanessa crossed her arms, a calculating look entering her eyes. So, Doorman, do you think you could play at a high-class charity gala? Or was that little performance the best you can do? There was challenge in her voice and something else. Dismissal, as if she had already decided he couldn't possibly be good enough for her event, despite what she had just heard. Thomas felt a flicker of something he hadn't experienced in years, pride in his musical ability. I believe I could, Ms. Hartman. I was once considered quite promising. Vanessa let out a short laugh. Promising? I need excellence, not promise. She looked him up and down, taking in his uniform with an expression that made it clear she thought him completely unsuitable. Then, almost as a joke, she turned to her assistant who had appeared in the doorway. You know what? If he can actually play well enough to impress my guest tomorrow night, I'll marry him. The assistant's mouth fell open in shock, but Vanessa was already laughing at her own joke. Wouldn't that be something? The millionaire and the doorman. Thomas stood perfectly still, his face carefully neutral despite the sting of her mockery. He had faced worse in his life than the casual cruelty of the wealthy. I should get back to my duties. Ms. Hartman, he said politely, moving to step past her. Wait. Vanessa held up a hand, her expression shifting as she seemed to consider something. You really think you could handle a 2-hour performance of classical pieces? Without embarrassing me? Thomas looked directly into her eyes. I know I could. For the first time since she'd arrived at the hotel, Vanessa Hartman looked genuinely intrigued. Prove it, she said. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Audition for me and we'll see if you're as good as you think you are. As Thomas nodded and left the ballroom, his heart was racing. After 7 years of silence, he would play for an audience. Again, even if that audience was just a demanding millionaire who had ridiculed him moments ago. Little did either of them know that this encounter would change both their lives forever. Thomas barely slept that night. His small apartment, usually a quiet refuge after long days at the hotel, felt electric with tension. After his shift ended, he had dusted off the old upright piano that sat against his living room wall, a treasured possession he'd sacrificed so much to keep. His fingers were rusty at first, missing notes he once hit effortlessly, but as the night wore on, the old magic began to return. By the time morning came, Thomas had practiced until his fingers ached. He made himself a strong cup of coffee and stared at his uniform hanging on the door. For the first time in years, he wished he owned something nicer to wear. He wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. What if he embarrassed himself in front of Vanessa Hartman and lost his job in the process? Mr. Reynolds, the hotel manager, had been surprisingly supportive when Thomas explained the situation. You can play the piano? He had asked, genuine surprise in his voice. I studied it seriously. Once upon a time, Thomas had replied. Well, if you can help Ms. Hartman with her crisis, that would certainly reflect well on the hotel. The manager had paused thoughtfully. Take your lunch break at 2 for the audition. And Thomas, good luck. Now, as he put on his uniform and headed to work, Thomas felt like he was walking in a dream. The familiar routine of greeting guests and opening doors felt strangely distant, his mind constantly wandering to the pieces he would play later. You seem distracted today, commented Rita, the concierge, as Thomas helped an elderly couple with their luggage. Just tired, he replied with a small smile. The morning dragged on endlessly. Thomas caught glimpses of Vanessa in the lobby, barking orders at hotel staff and her own assistant. She didn't acknowledge him once, not even when he held the door for her as she stepped outside to take a phone call. He wondered if she even remembered their conversation from the night before, or if it had been just another forgettable moment in her busy life. At precisely 1:55 p.m., Thomas handed his post over to another doorman and made his way to the ballroom. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. As he approached the grand room, he heard voices inside. This is a waste of time, Vanessa was saying. He's probably not even going to show up. You seemed impressed by what you heard last night, her assistant replied gently. I was tired and desperate. Anyone sounds good at that point. Thomas took a deep breath and walked in. The ballroom looked even more impressive in daylight, with sunlight streaming through the tall windows onto the polished floor. Vanessa stood near the piano, looking impatient in a fitted dark suit, her assistant hovering nearby. 3 other people Thomas didn't recognize sat in chairs a short distance away, likely part of the event planning team. Vanessa raised an eyebrow when she saw him. "You're still wearing your uniform." "I'm on my lunch break," Thomas explained quietly. "I have to return to work afterward." She sighed dramatically. "Fine, let's get this over with." She gestured toward the piano. "Show me what you can do." Thomas walked to the magnificent instrument, feeling every eye in the room on him. He sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. For a moment, doubt crept in. It had been so long since he'd performed for anyone who truly understood music. "Today would be nice," Vanessa said, checking her watch. That small spark of irritation was exactly what Thomas needed. He straightened his back, took a breath, and began to play. He started with Debussy's Clair de Lune, his fingers finding the delicate balance between strength and gentleness that the piece required. The room fell silent as the beautiful melody filled the space. Thomas closed his eyes, letting the music take him away from the ballroom, away from the judging eyes. He remembered why he had once loved performing, this sense of creating something beautiful out of nothing but air and emotion. When the final notes faded, he immediately transitioned into Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu, a technically challenging piece that had once been his specialty. His fingers flew across the keys, the rapid notes crisp and precise. He could feel himself smiling as the familiar rush of adrenaline coursed through him. Thomas finished the piece with a flourish and finally looked up. The small audience sat in complete silence. Vanessa's assistant had her mouth slightly open in astonishment. One of the event planners was wiping away a tear. And Vanessa herself stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable. "Is that sufficient, or would you like to hear something else?" Thomas asked politely. Vanessa seemed to snap out of a trance. "What else can you play?" "I have a wide repertoire of classical pieces. Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Liszt, some more modern composers as well." "What about Rhapsody in Blue? Gershwin? It's the signature piece for tomorrow's gala." Thomas nodded. "I know it well." Without waiting for further instruction, he launched into the famous opening, the clarinet glissando translated perfectly to piano. As he played, he noticed Vanessa moving closer to the piano, watching his hands with intense focus. For nearly 15 minutes, Thomas played excerpts from the complex piece, showcasing the jazzy rhythms and sweeping melodies that made it so beloved. When he finally stopped, his lunch break had long expired, but he didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. The silence that followed was profound. Thomas stood up from the bench and straightened his uniform. "I should get back to my post," he said quietly. "Wait." Vanessa's voice had lost its sharp edge. You can actually play, really play." "Yes, Ms. Hartman, I told you I could." She seemed flustered, an emotion Thomas suspected few people ever witnessed in her. "Where did you study again?" "The National Conservatory. I had to leave during my 3rd year." "Why?" she asked, sounding genuinely curious. Thomas hesitated, unused to sharing his personal life, especially with someone like Vanessa. "Family responsibilities. My father became ill, and we needed money for his care." Something shifted in Vanessa's expression, a flicker of something almost like respect. She turned to her assistant. "Call the agency and tell them we've found our pianist." She looked back at Thomas. "Can you play for 2 hours tomorrow night?" "Yes. And you know enough pieces to fill a program?" "More than enough," Vanessa nodded decisively. "Then the job is yours. We pay $1,000 for the evening." She named a figure that was more than Thomas made in a week at the hotel. "My assistant will email you the specific pieces we need." Thomas stood straighter. "I'll need tomorrow afternoon off to prepare properly. I'll speak with your manager." Vanessa was already turning away, her mind clearly moving on to the next problem to solve. Her assistant approached Thomas with a genuine smile. "That was incredible. I've never seen her speechless before." "Thank you," Thomas replied, still trying to process what had just happened. "About what she said last night." The assistant lowered her voice, looking embarrassed. "The marriage joke?" Thomas smiled. "Don't worry. I didn't take it seriously." The assistant looked relieved. "Good. She says things sometimes without thinking." Thomas nodded. "I should really get back to work now." As he walked back to his post at the front door, Thomas felt lighter than he had in years. Playing again, really playing, had awakened something he thought he'd lost forever. Even if this was just a one-time opportunity, it had reminded him of who he used to be, who he still was, underneath the doorman's uniform. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Word had somehow spread among the staff that Thomas would be playing at the gala, and he received curious glances and surprised congratulations from his coworkers. "Is it true you're performing tomorrow night?" Rita asked during their afternoon break. "Apparently so," Thomas replied, still not quite believing it himself. "Why didn't you ever tell any of us you could play piano like that?" Thomas shrugged. It never came up. By the time his shift ended, Thomas was exhausted but excited. As he was preparing to leave, Mr. Reynolds called him into his office. "Ms. Hartman spoke with me," the manager said. "You've got tomorrow afternoon off to prepare for the gala." "And Thomas," he smiled, "she was quite insistent that you be properly dressed for the occasion. There's a suit being delivered to your apartment tonight courtesy of the hotel." Thomas was stunned. "Sir, that's not necessary. Consider it an investment. Having one of our staff showcase such talent reflects well on all of us." When Thomas finally arrived home that evening, he found a delivery box waiting outside his door. Inside was a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than 3 months of his salary. A small card inside read simply, "Don't embarrass me." VH Thomas laughed out loud. Even her gestures of generosity came with a threat. He carefully hung up the suit and sat down at his old piano again, playing softly into the night. Tomorrow would be his first real performance in 7 years, in front of wealthy donors and industry elites. As his fingers moved through scales and familiar pieces, Thomas allowed himself to imagine just for a moment what his life might have been if he'd been able to continue his studies. But then he pushed the thought away. There was no use dwelling on what might have been. Tomorrow was about making the most of this unexpected chance, proving to Vanessa Hartman, and perhaps to himself, that there was more to him than met the eye. He played until his neighbors knocked on the wall, asking for quiet. Then he sat in silence, listening to the echoes of music in his mind, wondering what tomorrow would bring. The day of the gala arrived with a mix of excitement and anxiety that left Thomas feeling like he was walking on air. He had been given the entire day off from his doorman duties, a rare occurrence that made the whole situation feel even more dreamlike. He spent the morning practicing in his apartment, going through the playlist that Vanessa's assistant had emailed him. Most of the pieces were classics he knew well, Gershwin, Chopin, Debussy, but there were a few modern compositions that required extra attention. By noon, his fingers were warmed up and his confidence was growing. The new suit hung on his bedroom door, still in its protective cover. Thomas had never owned anything so fine. When he finally put it on that afternoon, he barely recognized the man in the mirror. The perfectly tailored black jacket and pants made him look taller, more dignified. For the first time in years, he looked like the concert pianist he had once dreamed of becoming. As instructed, Thomas arrived at the hotel through the service entrance at 4 o'clock. The ballroom had been transformed since his audition the day before. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm glow on tables dressed with white linens and elegant centerpieces. The stage where the grand piano waited was now framed by tasteful blue and silver drapery, with soft spotlights aimed at the gleaming instrument. "There you are," a voice called. Vanessa's assistant hurried over, looking stressed but managing a smile. "You look great." "Very professional." "Thank you," Thomas replied, feeling strangely nervous now that he was here. "Where would you like me to wait until it's time?" "There's a small green room behind the stage. You can warm up on the upright piano back there." She pointed to a door at the side of the ballroom. "Vanessa wants you to start playing background music at 6 when the first guests arrive. The formal performance begins at 8 after dinner." Thomas nodded. "I'll be ready." The green room was small but comfortable, with a decent upright piano that was nowhere near the quality of the grand piano on stage, but sufficient for warming up. Thomas removed his jacket, hung it carefully on a hanger provided, and sat down to play a few scales. He could hear the sounds of last-minute preparations through the door, staff calling to each other, glasses clinking, chairs being arranged. At 5:45, a knock came at the door. Thomas expected to see the assistant again, but instead, Vanessa herself walked in. She was dressed in a stunning blue evening gown, her dark hair swept up elegantly, looking every bit the successful businesswoman hosting a high-profile charity event. She stopped short when she saw him, her eyes widening slightly. "You clean up well, Doorman," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Thank you. So do you." Thomas replied politely, standing up. Vanessa seemed momentarily at a loss for words, as if she hadn't expected him to compliment her back. Then she straightened, all business again. I need to go through the program with you one more time. After the dinner, I'll introduce you and talk about the music scholarship program this gala is funding. Then you'll play the 3 showcase pieces we discussed. Is that clear? Perfectly clear. She looked at him for a long moment. Are you nervous? The question caught Thomas off guard with its unexpected perceptiveness. A little, he admitted. It's been a long time since I performed for an audience that matters. Something softened briefly in her expression. Well, don't be. Just play like you did yesterday and... She paused. Try not to think about who's listening. It was the closest thing to encouragement Thomas had heard from her. Before he could respond, she turned and walked to the door. 6 o'clock. Don't be late, she said over her shoulder. And then she was gone. At precisely 6, Thomas took his place at the grand piano on stage. He began with soft, elegant background pieces as the first guests arrived. Wealthy donors in expensive clothes, greeting each other with air kisses and practiced smiles. None of them paid much attention to the piano player, just as they had never noticed him opening doors. Thomas didn't mind. There was something freeing about being invisible while creating something beautiful. He watched Vanessa work the room, moving from group to group with practiced charm, laughing at jokes, touching arms lightly, champagne glass in hand. She was good at this, better than he had expected from someone with her reputation for coldness. As the ballroom filled and guests took their seats for dinner, Thomas continued playing, transitioning seamlessly between pieces, adding his own subtle improvisations. He caught Vanessa looking his way occasionally, an unreadable expression on her face. The hotel staff served a lavish dinner while Thomas played. From his position, he could see familiar faces among the servers, co-workers who now watched him with new eyes, some giving him discreet thumbs-up signs when they passed by the piano. Rita, the concierge, was helping with coat check and beamed proudly at him whenever their eyes met. After dinner, Vanessa stepped onto the small stage beside the piano. Thomas paused his playing as she took a microphone. Distinguished guests, thank you all for coming tonight, she began, her voice smooth and confident. The Arts Foundation is close to my heart because I believe that talent should never be wasted due to lack of opportunity. Thomas found himself listening intently as she spoke passionately about music education and the scholarship program the gala was funding. It seemed genuine, not the practiced charity speech he had expected. Tonight we have a special performance, Vanessa continued, glancing at Thomas. Our pianist this evening is a remarkable talent who, due to life circumstances, was unable to complete his conservatory education. She paused and, to Thomas's surprise, gave him a small, almost apologetic smile. Sometimes extraordinary ability hides in plain sight. Please welcome Thomas Reyes. The applause was polite but unexcited. These people had heard many performances at many charity events. Thomas took a deep breath, nodded his thanks to Vanessa as she stepped off the stage and turned to face the piano. He started with Debussy's Reverie, a gentle piece to capture the audience's attention. As he played, he forgot about the wealthy people watching, forgot about Vanessa and her challenge. There was only the music flowing from his fingers as naturally as breathing. When he finished the piece, the applause was warmer, some guests sitting up straighter, paying real attention now. For his second piece, he chose Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, dramatic, technically demanding, full of passion. Thomas lost himself in the thundering chords and lightning-fast runs. His years of practice before life interrupted his career had built muscle memory that now returned in full force. When the final notes rang out, there was a moment of silence before the applause erupted, much more enthusiastic this time. Thomas dared to look up at the audience. People were whispering to each other, gesturing toward him with impressed expressions. At the back of the room, he saw several hotel staff members who had slipped in to listen, standing against the wall with proud smiles. And in the front row, Vanessa sat very still, watching him with an intensity that was almost unsettling. For his final piece, Thomas played Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, the centerpiece of the evening. The familiar opening wailed through the ballroom, silencing all conversation. As he played the complex jazz-influenced composition, Thomas felt something unlock inside him. pure joy in performing, in creating something that moved others. His body swayed with the music, his face reflecting the changing moods of the piece. When he reached the triumphant conclusion, Thomas was breathing hard, as if he had run a race. Before the last note had faded, the audience was on its feet, applauding wildly. Several people were dabbing at their eyes. An older gentleman in the front row was shouting, "Bravo!" repeatedly. Thomas stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. As he straightened, his eyes met Vanessa's. She was applauding too, a genuine smile transforming her usually stern face into something approaching wonder. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Thomas returned to playing background music as guests mingled and made donation pledges. But now people came up to the piano, complimenting his playing, asking about his background. Several handed him business cards, gallery owners, music teachers, even the director of a small theater company. "You were holding out on us, Thomas," Rita said during a brief break, bringing him a glass of water. "Who would have thought our doorman was a secret piano genius?" Thomas smiled. "Not a genius, just someone who loved music and got a second chance." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Thomas continued playing softly. He noticed Vanessa deep in conversation with an older man, whose expensive watch and confident manner screamed, "Important donor." They kept glancing his way as they talked. Finally, around midnight, the last guests departed. Thomas played a final piece, a gentle Chopin nocturne, then closed the piano lid. The ballroom was nearly empty now, just a few staff members clearing tables and Vanessa speaking with her assistant near the door. Thomas stood, stretched his stiff fingers, and collected the business cards guests had left him. He wasn't sure what any of it meant for his future, but tonight had awakened possibilities he had long ago forced himself to forget. "Thomas." Vanessa's voice came from behind him. He turned to find her approaching the piano, looking tired but still elegant in her blue gown. "Ms. Hartman," he acknowledged with a small nod. "I think, after tonight, you can call me Vanessa." She stood beside the piano, running one finger lightly across its polished surface. "You were—" She seemed to search for the right word. "Extraordinary." Coming from her, the simple compliment felt more meaningful than all the effusive praise from the guests. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Do you know who that man was? The one I was speaking with earlier?" Thomas shook his head. "William Chen. He's the director of the City Symphony Orchestra." Vanessa's eyes had an unusual brightness to them. "He wants to meet with you. They're looking for a pianist for their upcoming season." Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. "The symphony? But I haven't played seriously in years. Could have fooled me. Could have fooled everyone here tonight." Vanessa looked at him with newfound respect. "You do realize what happened here, don't you? You just changed your life." Thomas stood very still, letting her words sink in. Had he? Was it possible that one night, one chance encounter, could redirect the course of his existence? "I guess I did," he said finally, a slow smile spreading across his face. Vanessa smiled back, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no mockery in it. "So about that marriage proposal," she began teasingly. Thomas laughed, surprising both of them. "I think we can agree that was a joke best forgotten." "Maybe," Vanessa said softly, her expression suddenly serious. "Or maybe it just needs to be reimagined as something else entirely." Before Thomas could respond, she turned and walked toward the door. "My assistant will be in touch about payment. And Thomas?" She paused, looking back at him. "Don't be late for your meeting with Mr. Chen." As she disappeared through the doorway, Thomas stood alone on the stage, the events of the evening spinning through his mind. In the space of 24 hours, he had gone from invisible doorman to celebrated pianist. And somehow the woman who had mockingly challenged him now seemed to see him, really see him, for the first time. Thomas gathered his jacket and headed toward the exit, nodding goodnight to the cleaning staff. Tomorrow he would be back at his post by the door, in his doorman's uniform. But now he knew that the uniform was just one part of who he was, not the whole story. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The morning after the gala, Thomas woke up early despite having slept only a few hours. His fingers still tingled with the memory of playing the grand piano, and the applause echoed in his mind. For a moment he wondered if it had all been a dream, but the expensive suit hanging on his closet door and the stack of business cards on his nightstand proved otherwise. He made coffee and sat at his old upright piano, running his fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them down. His neighbors wouldn't appreciate music at 6 in the morning. The contrast between the worn instrument and the magnificent grand piano from last night was stark, but Thomas felt a renewed appreciation for this faithful companion that had kept his skills alive during the lean years. By 7:30, he was back at the Royal Palm Hotel, dressed in his familiar doorman's uniform. Mr. Reynolds greeted him with a broad smile as he clocked in. There he is, the man of the hour. The manager clapped him on the shoulder. Everyone's talking about your performance last night. I had 3 different board members compliment me on having such talented staff. Thomas smiled modestly. I'm glad they enjoyed it. Enjoyed it? They were blown away. Mr. Reynolds lowered his voice conspiratorially. And between you and me, I've never seen Ms. Hartman look so impressed. Not once in all the years she's been coming here. Thomas felt a warmth creep into his cheeks. She was very professional about the whole thing. Well, she's requested that you be assigned to special events from now on, whenever we need someone to play the piano in the lounge or for smaller gatherings. With a proper increase in pay, of course. Mr. Reynolds straightened his tie, looking pleased. It seems you found a way to combine both jobs. Thomas was genuinely surprised. That's very generous. It's good business, the manager replied pragmatically. Now get to your post, and don't be surprised if some of our guests recognize you today. The morning passed strangely. Thomas resumed his duties at the front door, greeting guests and hailing taxis, but something had changed. Several hotel staff members who had barely spoken to him before now stopped to chat, asking about his music background. Guests from the gala did double takes when they realized their doorman was the same man who had moved them to tears with Gershwin the night before. Around noon, a sleek black car pulled up, and Thomas stepped forward to open the door. To his surprise, William Chen, the symphony director Vanessa had introduced him to, stepped out. Ah, Mr. Reyes, the older man said with genuine warmth. I was hoping I'd catch you here. Mr. Chen, Thomas greeted him, feeling slightly awkward in his uniform. Welcome back to the Royal Palm. Thank you. Chen glanced at Thomas's outfit with a small smile. It's a bit surreal seeing you here after last night's performance. I imagine it is, Thomas agreed. I meant what I said about meeting with you, Chen said, lowering his voice. We're holding auditions for guest pianists next month. I'd like you to come. Thomas felt his heart rate quicken. I would be honored, but I should warn you my repertoire might need refreshing. It's been a while since I've performed professionally. Based on what I heard last night, you'll have no problem. Chen pulled out a business card, another to add to Thomas's growing collection. Call my office this week. We'll set something up. He patted Thomas on the arm and walked into the hotel. Thomas slipped the card into his pocket, trying to maintain his professional composure while his mind raced with possibilities. A real audition with the symphony, something he'd dreamed of in his conservatory days. The afternoon brought another surprise. Around 3 o'clock, Thomas looked up to see Vanessa walking through the hotel entrance. She was dressed in a simple but obviously expensive outfit, her hair pulled back in its usual sleek style. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them seemed to know quite how to act. Good afternoon. Ms. Hartman, Thomas said formally, falling back on his training. Thomas. She nodded, then glanced around as if ensuring no one was within earshot. Do you have a break coming up soon? He checked his watch. In about 20 minutes. Good, meet me in the courtyard garden. Without waiting for a response, she walked into the hotel. For the next 20 minutes, Thomas performed his duties on autopilot, his mind filled with questions. What could Vanessa want to discuss? Was there a problem with his performance? Had she changed her mind about the payment? When his break finally came, he made his way to the small garden courtyard at the center of the hotel. It was a peaceful spot with stone benches and carefully tended flowers, rarely used by guests who preferred the larger gardens at the back of the property. Vanessa was sitting alone on a bench, typing rapidly on her phone. She looked up as Thomas approached and put the device away. You're still in the uniform, she observed, just as she had before his audition. Still on duty, he replied with a small smile, sitting on the bench opposite her. For a moment, neither spoke. It was strange seeing her in this quiet setting, without the usual flurry of assistants and event planners surrounding her. "I wanted to thank you properly," Vanessa finally said. "Last night was a tremendous success. We raised over $2 million for the music scholarship program, nearly double our goal." "That's wonderful," Thomas said sincerely. "I'm glad I could help." "You did more than help." She looked directly at him, her usual sharp gaze softened by something like curiosity. "People are still calling me about you. William Chen practically cornered me at breakfast to get your contact information." Thomas nodded. "He found me earlier, mentioned something about symphony auditions." "You should go," Vanessa said immediately. "It's a remarkable opportunity." "I'm thinking about it," Thomas admitted. "It's just a lot to process. 24 hours ago I was just a doorman with a forgotten dream." Vanessa studied him, her head tilted slightly. "Why did you stay here all these years? With your talent, you could have found a way back to music." The question was direct, bordering on invasive, but Thomas sensed genuine interest rather than judgment. "My father's medical bills took everything we had," he explained simply. "By the time he passed away, I had been out of the music world for 2 years. The job here was steady with good benefits. I sent money to my mother every month." He shrugged. "Time passes. You adjust to a new reality." "But you kept playing," Vanessa observed. "That old piano in your apartment? I'm guessing you've had it a long time." Thomas was surprised she remembered that detail from their brief conversation. "It was my grandmother's. I couldn't bring myself to sell it even when things were tight." Vanessa nodded slowly, as if piecing together a puzzle. "I've been thinking about what you said about life taking unexpected turns. Have you ever experienced that?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious about this woman who seemed to have everything perfectly under control. To his surprise, she laughed softly. "More than you might think." She looked away toward the flowers. "My company didn't just appear out of nowhere. Before the success, there were 3 failed startups, a bankruptcy, and a period where I slept on my cousin's couch and ate ramen noodles for weeks on end." Thomas couldn't hide his surprise. "That's not the story people tell about you." "It's not the story I usually tell about myself," she admitted. "Success is a better narrative than failure, but the truth is I know what it's like when life derails your plans." A comfortable silence fell between them. In the distance, Thomas could hear the sounds of the hotel, doors opening and closing, the murmur of voices. His break was nearly over. "I should get back to work," he said, standing up. Vanessa stood as well. "Yes, of course." She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "Your payment for last night." Thomas took it with a nod of thanks, though money seemed almost irrelevant after their conversation. "And this," she continued, handing him a small embossed card. "I'm hosting a small dinner at my home this weekend. 6 people, including William Chen and the director of the conservatory." She met his eyes directly. "I'd like you to come. Not as entertainment," she added quickly. "As a guest." Thomas took the invitation, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you. I'll be there." Vanessa nodded, suddenly looking almost shy, an expression he would never have associated with her. "Good. Well, I should let you get back to—" She gestured vaguely at his uniform. "Opening doors." Thomas finished with a smile. "For now," she said quietly, and there was something in her tone that suggested she saw well beyond his current role. As Thomas returned to his post, he felt as if he were walking between 2 worlds. The familiar routine of greeting guests and opening doors continued, but his mind kept drifting to symphony auditions and dinner invitations. The future suddenly held possibilities he had stopped allowing himself to imagine years ago. The next few days passed in a similar state of suspended reality. By day, Thomas performed his doorman duties with his usual professionalism. By night, he practiced furiously on his old piano, working through pieces he hadn't played in years, preparing for the symphony audition. He called Mr. Chen's office and scheduled an appointment for the following week. On Friday afternoon, Thomas was surprised to see his photograph in the local newspaper's art section. Someone from the gala had apparently tipped off a reporter about the doorman pianist, and they had run a small feature about his performance. The hotel management was delighted by the publicity, and even placed the article in a frame by the front desk. "You're becoming quite the local celebrity," Rita teased during their lunch break. "Soon you'll be too important to remember us regular folks." Thomas shook his head. Not a chance. This hotel gave me stability when I needed it most. I won't forget that. But you are going to pursue the music again, aren't you? She asked seriously. After what I heard at the gala, it would be a crime not to. Thomas thought about the question carefully. I'm going to try, he said finally. I don't know where it will lead, but I need to see if that door is still open. Saturday evening arrived, and Thomas found himself standing outside Vanessa's downtown penthouse, dressed in the same suit he had worn for the gala. He had debated buying a new tie but decided against it. The suit was already nicer than anything he had owned before. As the elevator ascended to the top floor, Thomas felt a flutter of nerves that had nothing to do with music. Since their conversation in the garden, he had found himself thinking about Vanessa in a way that surprised him. Beyond her wealth and sometimes prickly exterior, he had glimpsed someone complex and unexpectedly vulnerable. The elevator doors opened directly into a stunning penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Vanessa was greeting another guest but turned when she heard the elevator. For a moment their eyes met across the room and she smiled, a genuine warm expression that transformed her face. Thomas, she said, crossing the room to greet him. I'm so glad you could come. She was wearing a simple black dress, elegant but understated. Her usual business-like demeanor softened for the evening. As she introduced him to her other guests, accomplished, influential people from the city's arts community, Thomas realized she was going out of her way to make him feel like he belonged in this rarefied world. And perhaps most surprisingly of all, as the evening progressed and Thomas found himself engaged in passionate discussions about music with people who spoke his long-forgotten language, he began to believe that maybe he did belong after all. When William Chen raised his glass in a toast near the end of dinner, his words seemed to capture the strange, wonderful turning point Thomas now found himself facing. To unexpected talents and new beginnings, the symphony director said, smiling at Thomas, and to the remarkable paths that bring us where we're meant to be. Across the table, Vanessa's eyes met Thomas's, and in them, he saw not the woman who had once mockingly challenged a doorman, but someone who believed in second chances, perhaps for both of them. 6 months had passed since the night Thomas played at Vanessa's charity gala, and his life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined. Today was his last day as a doorman at the Royal Palm Hotel. He stood at his familiar post by the front entrance, greeting guests and opening doors with the same warm smile and professional demeanor he had maintained for years. Going to miss this place? Rita asked, stopping by his station during her break. Over the years, she had become one of his closest friends at the hotel. More than I expected, Thomas admitted. It's been a big part of my life, Rita smiled knowingly. But not as big as what's waiting for you now. She was right. 3 months ago, after a nerve-wracking audition, Thomas had been offered a position with the City Symphony Orchestra, not as the lead pianist. That role belonged to someone with decades of experience, but as a featured soloist for their upcoming season and a regular performer for their community concert series. The position came with enough income that he could finally focus on music full-time. Mr. Reynolds approached, his expression a mixture of pride and sadness. Almost time, Thomas. The staff would like to say goodbye properly. We're gathering in the employee lounge at 4. I'll be there, Thomas promised, touched by the gesture. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas found himself studying the hotel's grand entrance with new eyes, appreciating details he had taken for granted during his years of service. The elegant revolving door, the polished brass fixtures, the marble floor he had crossed thousands of times. This place had been his anchor during difficult years, providing stability when his music career had seemed like an abandoned dream. At precisely 4 o'clock, Thomas entered the employee lounge to find it packed with hotel staff, doormen, bellhops, housekeepers, chefs, front desk clerks, and management. Someone had brought cake and a handmade banner reading, "Congratulations, Thomas," hung on the wall. "Speech," someone called out after Mr. Reynolds had presented Thomas with a parting gift, a beautiful pen set engraved with his name and the hotel logo. Thomas, usually comfortable with public speaking, felt a lump in his throat as he looked around at his colleagues. "I came to the Royal Palm thinking it would be temporary," he began, his voice soft but steady. "Just a job to pay the bills until I figured out what came next. But somewhere along the way it became more than that. You became more than co-workers. You became my family." He paused, gathering his thoughts. I want to thank you all for your support, especially these past few months. And I want you to know that whenever I perform, a part of me will always be the doorman who found his way back to music because people here believed in second chances. The room erupted in applause, and Thomas found himself surrounded by well-wishers accepting hugs and handshakes. There were a few damp eyes in the crowd, including his own. As the gathering began to disperse, people returning to their duties, Thomas felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Mr. Reynolds holding out an envelope. "This came for you earlier," the manager said. "Seemed important, so I saved it." Thomas recognized Vanessa's elegant handwriting immediately. He slipped the envelope into his pocket for later, thanked Mr. Reynolds again, and made his final round saying goodbye. At 5 o'clock, Thomas changed out of his doorman's uniform for the last time. He carefully folded the dark blue jacket that had been such a significant part of his identity and placed it in his locker. Then he put on a simple button-down shirt and slacks. No longer a doorman, not quite a professional musician yet, but somewhere in between. Outside the hotel, the early evening was pleasantly warm. Thomas stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the imposing building where he had spent so much of the past decade. Then he turned and began walking toward the park, his mind filled with memories and possibilities. He found a quiet bench and finally opened Vanessa's envelope. Inside was a simple card containing an address, a time, and a brief message. "One more surprise. Meet me there." Thomas smiled. In the months since the gala, his relationship with Vanessa had evolved in unexpected ways. After the dinner at her penthouse, they had begun meeting regularly, first under the guise of discussing his music career, then simply because they enjoyed each other's company. Thomas had been surprised to discover how easy it was to talk to her once the barriers of position and status had fallen away. Vanessa had been instrumental in his symphony audition, not by pulling strings as he had initially feared she might try to do, but by helping him prepare, listening to him practice, offering honest feedback. She had attended the audition, sitting quietly in the back of the hall, and the smile on her face when he received the offer had been as rewarding as the position itself. The address in her note was in a part of town Thomas didn't visit often, a neighborhood of converted warehouses that had become trendy studios and loft apartments. Curious, he hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address. 20 minutes later, Thomas stood outside a large brick building with huge windows. A discreet plaque beside the entrance read, "Hartwell Art Center, coming soon." He checked the address again, confirmed he was in the right place, and tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the space was vast and still under renovation. Construction equipment sat against walls and the smell of fresh paint hung in the air. But even in its unfinished state, Thomas could see the vision taking shape. A beautiful, open performance venue with natural light streaming through the tall windows. "What do you think?" Vanessa's voice echoed from across the room. She stepped out from a doorway, dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse, an outfit he had only recently discovered she preferred to her business suits when not working. "It's incredible," Thomas said honestly, looking around. "Your new project?" Vanessa nodded, walking toward him. "The foundation is expanding its mission. Beyond just scholarships, we want to create a space where musicians can perform, teach, and collaborate." She stopped in front of him, a hint of nervousness in her usually confident demeanor. "That's actually why I asked you to come." She led him through the space, pointing out areas still under construction: practice rooms, a recording studio, classrooms, and the centerpiece, a performance hall with a stage large enough for chamber orchestras. "We're installing a grand piano next week," she explained as they stood on the empty stage. "Steinway. The best they make," Thomas nodded appreciatively. "The acoustics in here will be amazing." "That's what the designer said." Vanessa took a deep breath as if preparing herself for something. "Thomas, I'd like you to consider being our artistic director." He stared at her, certain he had misheard. "What? The artistic director," she repeated. "You would oversee our music programs, help select performers for our concert series, teach master classes when your symphony schedule allows." She spoke quickly, as if afraid he might interrupt. "It would be part-time at first, but eventually, if things go well, it could become your primary focus." Thomas was speechless. He had expected many things from his last day as a doorman, but not this. "Vanessa, I don't have the experience for something like this. I've been out of the music world for years. But you've lived in both worlds, she countered. That's exactly why you're perfect. You understand what it means to have talent but face practical obstacles. The whole point of this center is to create opportunities for people who might otherwise fall through the cracks. She touched his arm lightly, a gesture that had become familiar between them. You don't have to answer now. Think about it. Talk to the symphony people. Make sure it wouldn't conflict. Thomas looked around the space again, trying to absorb the offer. This is incredible. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything yet. Vanessa smiled. But there is one more thing I wanted to show you. She led him to a small room off the main hall. Unlike the rest of the building, this space was completely finished. Walls painted, lighting installed, floor polished. In the center sat a beautiful upright piano nearly identical to his old one but in perfect condition. What's this? Thomas asked, confused. Your teaching studio, if you accept the position. Vanessa looked suddenly shy, unusual for her. I noticed how attached you are to your grandmother's piano, but it's seen better days. I thought maybe having one like it here would make this place feel more like... She hesitated. Somewhere you belong. Thomas was deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. He sat at the piano, running his fingers over the keys, feeling their perfect action. The instrument was both familiar and new, like so much in his life lately. Try it, Vanessa encouraged, sitting beside him on the bench. Thomas began to play the same Chopin nocturne he had played the night Vanessa discovered his talent. The piano's tone was rich and warm, filling the small room with beauty. As he played, he felt Vanessa's shoulder against his, a comfortable pressure that spoke of the ease that had grown between them. When he finished, neither spoke for a moment. Then Vanessa turned slightly to face him. Do you remember what I said that first night, after I heard you play? Thomas smiled. You said if I could play well enough to impress your guests, you'd marry me. I did say that. Her voice was soft, almost vulnerable. It was meant as a joke, a cruel one, I realize now. It's okay. I knew you weren't serious, but what if I am now? Vanessa asked quietly. Thomas looked at her, startled. What? She laughed softly at his expression. I'm not actually proposing, Thomas, not yet. We have a lot to figure out first. Her eyes were warm as she looked at him. But I want you to know that I've never met anyone like you. Someone who could walk away from their dream and find dignity in a different path, then return to that dream without bitterness or regret. Thomas was moved by her words. I've never met anyone like you either, he said honestly. Someone who could look beyond appearances and see possibility where others saw only a doorman. Vanessa reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. I don't know where this is going, Thomas. I just know I want to find out. Together. Thomas squeezed her hand gently, feeling the rightness of it in his. From their first meeting to this moment, they had traveled a remarkable path, from mockery to respect, from distance to closeness, from rigid roles to something open and undefined. Together, he agreed, the word a promise. Outside, the sun was setting, casting golden light through the tall windows of what would soon be a place of music and opportunity. Thomas thought about the journey that had brought him here, the dreams deferred, the steady work that had sustained him, the chance encounter that had changed everything. Life rarely moved in straight lines. It curved and doubled back, created unexpected harmonies like the complex pieces he loved to play. 6 months ago, he had been a doorman with a hidden talent and abandoned hopes. Now he sat beside a woman who had once seemed completely out of reach, planning a future neither could have imagined. Play something else, Vanessa requested, leaning slightly against his shoulder. Something happy. Thomas smiled and began a bright, joyful Schubert piece that danced with optimism. As his fingers found the familiar pattern of notes, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the strange, wonderful path that had led him here. Sometimes life's most beautiful melodies came from its most unexpected turns,